Hey, it's Spoonie, and it's time for the February update on the progress of Kitten Space Agency. Once again, I am really impressed with the progress this development team is making. Also, the transparency is really refreshing, especially when you compare it to the often half-year-long silence treatment we were getting from Intercept Games and Kerbal Space Program 2. If you're just now finding out about Kitten Space Agency, this is a game intended to be the spiritual successor to Kerbal Space Program, after the disastrous launch of Kerbal Space Program 2 led to the dismantling of its development studio Intercept Games and the subsequent sell-off of the Kerbal IP by its parent company Take-Two. The IP, along with Private Division and its other projects, were sold off to a private equity group called Haveli Investments, and while there are rumors circulating about a new team being formed by ex-Annapurna developers, nothing has been confirmed. And even if the rumors are true, they relate to the titles owned by Private Division, which could mean that they're working on any number of titles, not just Kerbal Space Program 2. And maybe not Kerbal Space Program 2 at all. We'll just have to wait and see what happens. I cover all of these rumors in detail in part 2 of my January update for Kitten Space Agency, and that video is linked at the very bottom of this video's description, and will also be linked at the end of this video. So where are we so far in the development of Kitten Space Agency? Well, first let's bring everyone up to speed with a short recap. We've talked about in prior updates the seamless transitions from orbit to the surface of planets. The developers have managed to accomplish this through a process of pre-rendering meshes rather than rendering them in real time. This process is called spherical billboards. Because there are no large scenes that need to be constantly updated or rendered, the developers are able to swap out these pre-rendered meshes for planets as you approach them, creating a significantly smoother transition from orbit down to the surface and back again. We can see this in a few of the videos posted by the development team, and so far, it looks really amazing. The lack of a persistent scene, along with the freedom of using their custom framework called Brutal rather than a game engine that already existed, also allows the developers to implement something called instantiable physics, which means everything in the game is playing by its own set of rules, rather than being constantly influenced by everything else everywhere in the game all the time. This gives a massive boost to performance and also allows for some really smooth transitions from one ship in orbit around a planet or moon to another one that maybe is sitting on the surface of another planet. So just a lot of really cool new mechanics to boost performance over what we saw in the Kerbal games. We also, just this past month, got an update on patched conics and how they're coming along, which is essentially how the game calculates gravitational forces. Obviously, this is the first step in allowing ships to actually orbit something. RocketWerkz also revealed some new hires of a few people with impressive resumes in the fields of mathematics and actual rocket science. Along with those, Blackrack gave us some more updates on his incredible visuals for isometric clouds, which I can honestly say are some of the best I have ever seen in any game. I am endlessly impressed with his work, because this is not an easy thing to accomplish. Blackrack, in previous updates, also gave us our first glimpse at what kind of hardware might be needed to run this game, revealing that he is capturing these images and testing his work on a 2080 Super, which, while that is a powerful card, it came out nearly 6 years ago in 2019. Yes, 2019 was 6 years ago, and I don't like this being pointed out any more than you do. I'm sorry. Existential crises aside, this is a good indication that this card and probably some much older cards will be more than capable of running this game, although this is purely speculation and nothing official about minimum specs has been revealed. And finally, we got our first look at what an orbiting ship might look like. I have to admit, I got a bit carried away with my excitement and overlooked the fact that this is not a display of in-game parts, but rather this is a model of the Apollo lander that was ported in for testing purposes. That said, I assume that this is at least some indication of the artistic direction that ships will follow. But even if it's not, it shows us some of the newly implemented lighting effects on these parts, and they just look gorgeous. Okay, so those are the main points that should bring you up to speed for this month. But if you're interested in going more into detail and seeing more visuals and some of the footage of the game's brutal framework in action, be sure to check out my prior month's update videos. So, in the last few weeks, we've gotten several updates, many of them focused on graphics and mechanics. Firstly, we were given some more images of the Apollo command module that is being used for testing. These images show off the vessel render techniques that will later become the part renderers. So it does give us some idea of what the parts might look like when those begin being implemented and a shipbuilder is further along. Also, these images aren't renders. These images were taken of this vehicle actually in orbit that they have some amount of control over. Not only do these images show off some of the new lighting effects, but also the new shadows that have been implemented. And I think these look incredible. Honestly, no notes. If they said that this was the finished product for lighting and shadows, I would be extremely satisfied. What's really cool is in the final image posted, we are able to see the light's color shifting as the craft moves around the orbital body and the light becomes filtered through the atmosphere. This is stunning, and will no doubt lead to some really great screenshots once this game is released. Continuing on with the graphics updates, we got a new video from Blackrack showing the upscaling performance of clouds. About halfway through the video, the upscaling is turned off and the frame rate drops from between 100 and 160 to between 25 and 40 frames per second. That is a major dip, which shows just how much progress is being made here, and this is seriously impressive for something this early. Especially when you consider, as was pointed out in the post, that there is no game engine helping the team through this. All of this progress in visuals and performance is being done without the tools available in Unity, Unreal, or any other game engine. This gives the developers a ton of freedom, but as they said, there is also nothing holding their hands. The biggest new info we got this month was probably the first look at the nav ball. This is a work in progress, and they asked us to ignore some of the aliasing. Aliasing refers to the jagged edges around some of the textures. So the final product will probably be a bit cleaner, but honestly, I personally kind of like the aliasing here. It gives an old school feel that I think creates a nice contrast to the upgraded graphics compared to KSP. This is something I could see the developers creating multiple skins for though. It would also be a fun way to create maybe bonuses for people who play the free early access period or people who buy the game within its first few months. Maybe they get a spherical navball skin that can be swapped out. Just an idea. There's a lot you could do with the HUD skins. We also got some images that show some maneuver nodes and some of what the orbit screen will look like. I don't know if this is a work in progress or final design concepts, but from what I see, I like that it has a familiar feel while still being distinct from KSP. These also show that the ascending nodes and descending nodes are now working with lines to show their relative positions. These nodes are not to be confused with your apoapsis or periapsis, in that they are not the high point and low points of your orbit, but are rather the points in which your orbit crosses the plane of another orbital body. For instance, in this image, we can see Earth in the center. The red line represents the orbit of our ship, and the white line represents the orbit of the moon. Because we have a focus on the moon, we can see our ascending and descending nodes relative to the orbit of the moon. These are the 2 points where the orbital plane of our craft crosses the orbital plane of the moon. In this image, we're able to look at it from the side, and that gives us a clear picture of exactly what I mean. The orbits are at different angles. The other 2 nodes visible are labeled AP for apoapsis and PE for periapsis. The apoapsis is the highest point in your orbit relative to the body that you're orbiting, and the periapsis is the lowest point. Aside from the updates on the nodes, we also got a preview of what the capture and escape drawings will look like. You can see in these images where the orbital path is intersecting with other bodies and some slingshots as well as encounters. This looks very clean, and I imagine it will probably get fleshed out a bit more to make it a little easier to read. Maybe with different colors for various orbits or changes in color before and after encounters. I would also personally love the ability to permanently label and color different orbits for my ships or satellites that I have in orbit to make docking or encounters a little bit easier, especially when I have multiple crafts in orbit around a single body. And to top off our updates on orbits, we were shown some implementation of axial tilt, which will have orbits be relative to the axial rotation of their parent body, which is much closer to what we see in real life. I am really excited about this because it makes everything that much more accurate to what we see in our own universe. Kerbal Space Program famously did not employ these axial tilts, and instead had everything basically spinning perpendicular relative to their orbital plane. But that's not what we see in real life. For those that don't know, an orbital plane is the imaginary area outlined by a planetary orbit. So if a planet's orbit were represented by a vinyl record with the planet orbiting along the outside edge of it, the orbital plane would be the flat surface on that record. In real life, most planets have poles that are not exactly perpendicular to their orbital planes like we saw in Kerbal Space Program. Rather, they are tilted on an axis and sort of wobble as they spin along their orbit. This axial tilt is the primary cause for the seasons on our planets, and also why summer in the northern hemisphere is in June, whereas summer in the southern hemisphere is in December. Because depending on where the planet is in its orbit, you are either tilted towards or away from the sun. This is also why the closer or further you get from the equator, the less variation there are in seasons. I know a lot of people watching this know this stuff, but for those that don't, Kerbal Space Program is a great way to unintentionally learn a lot about orbital mechanics and rocket science. I learned a ton while playing without even realizing it. So hopefully Kitten Space Agency will continue to be so fun that people unintentionally learn a lot more about our universe and how it works. But enough about orbits. I saved what I think is the best for last, and that is, as usual, more clouds. Blackrack shared a few more progress updates that are even more stunning than what we saw in January. We can now see a lot more variation in the types of clouds here, along with some difference in elevation, giving them a much more realistic feel. And some of these images are so impressive that you could honestly be forgiven for not realizing that they aren't real, and are instead from a video game. As usual, I am stunned by how good these look, and cannot wait to see more as they progress even further. Hopefully, we will soon get a few more videos of flying from surface to orbit through these clouds, and maybe even get to see some more clouds on other planets sometime pretty soon. Given the variety that we're seeing, I still do wonder if the planets will have a weather system. I might try to reach out to someone on the team and ask about this, although I'm sure it's probably way too soon to tell. After all, that is probably asking a lot of the developers, adding a huge amount of complexity into a game that is already literally rocket science. But we did see that one image that had a hurricane in it, so if it does happen that there is a weather system, the first thing I'm going to do is try to launch a rocket through a hurricane. But what do you guys think? Should there be a weather system? Let me know down in the comments below. If you want to stay up to date on the development of this game and several others, or just want a heads up about the best deals on Steam going on each week, along with some game giveaways and reviews, make sure you subscribe so we can follow along together. Don't forget to hit that like button, it really helps my channel, and if you want to stay up to date on gaming news and developments, make sure you subscribe for more. Thanks for watching.